Hello and welcome. My name is Daniel H. Gillison Jr., and I'm the CEO for NAMI. And we're honored to be with you on this morning and on today with NAMI Keystone, Pennsylvania. And special thanks to your CEO, Christine Michaels, for inviting me and giving me the opportunity to take a part in this very important conversation and this morning's keynote. We have a very special guest with us. And before we introduce our guest, let me just say that the theme of today's conference is finding our path forward. And that's a part of what our guest will be talking about and finding our path forward. And our guest will be sharing her experiences in moving forward with heartache, mental health struggles, and more. So please join me in welcoming someone who I know very well, Miss Shanti Sad. And I'll give a little bit of background on Shanti and just want to say, first of all, Shanti, thank you. I know that you're extremely busy and you're always trying to move the needle on mental health with so many across the country. So we appreciate you giving us your time for this keynote conversation this morning. And we'll make it a conversation. It'll be about you. So I'll just be asking a lot of open-ended questions and just trying for this audience, for them to learn about you and your work and what brought you to this. So
Thank you, Dan.
let me start by talking about your career in the music industry. You've spent more than 25 years working at some of the biggest companies with some of the biggest names. We're talking about Prince, Usher, Outkast. And you started as an intern and made it all the way up to executive vice president. Would you tell our audience more about what your experiences were like working and growing in the music industry?
Absolutely. And first, I just want to, again, thank you all. Thank NAMI for allowing me to be a part of this. It really is an honor this morning. So, yeah, I had this really, really cool career in the entertainment industry. I'm originally from Atlanta, Georgia, ATL, as they say. And I got my start while I was in college, Dan. I attended Syracuse University. Yes, I bleed orange. And I majored in television, radio, and film at the Newhouse School of Communications. And I thought maybe I wanted a career in either radio or something around the music industry. And so I started interning at Capitol Records for 2 summers. And I was like an on-air disc jockey, assistant promotions director, and I did Capitol Records in the summers. So I kind of just immersed myself in the culture of music, right, and creativity in Atlanta and at my school. And so once I graduated, I landed my first job as promotions director right out of college in 1993 at LaFace Records with L.A. Reid and Babyface. So not a bad first gig and pretty cool bosses to work for straight out of college. And the very first record I ever worked and promoted was Players Ball from Outkast. So I don't know if anybody's listening is a fan of Outkast, but yeah, that was me taking those records and 12 inches to the clubs and that sort of thing. And in 1995, during the infamous Source Awards, I was right there with Andre and Dre when Andre uttered those famous words, "The South got something to say." So, pretty storied career for a young girl from Atlanta. And then I worked my way up and ended up being senior director of marketing at LaFace Records. And once the label was closed, or sold rather, to BMG, I moved up to New York City with L.A. Reid. He replaced Clive Davis, and I worked at Arista for about 1.5 years. Moved over to Columbia Records as vice president of urban marketing, and that's where I marketed additional careers like, Vivian Green and Jagged Edge and a gentleman called Life Jennings, and got to work with Prince. I actually did the marketing for the Musicology Project. And then I ended up at Universal Motown Records as executive vice president and worked with artists like Ashanti and Erykah Badu and Busta Rhymes, even got to do some small work with Stevie Wonder, but it's Stevie Wonder. So that was pretty awesome. So that was kind of my 20-year stint on the label side. So I'm very grateful for that career path.
Shanti, this audience doesn't know how long we've known each other, and so it's wonderful for them to hear your background and your matriculation through the industry. And as we talk about this, it's a very high stress occupation. How did working in the industry impact your own mental health as you were navigating all of those wonderful opportunities?
Great question, Dan. And at first, it was fine. Again, I was just this young, energetic young lady who worked really long hours, like 18 to 20 hours, but I didn't know any different. I thought, this is exciting. This is what I always wanted to do. I'm quote unquote living the dream. So I thought, and it was fine, for probably the first 7 or 8 years of my life. And then it just started wearing down on me. I remember telling my boss, L.A. Reid, I was like, I'm exhausted. Like, I'm thinking about, quitting, and I just can't do this anymore. And he was like, oh, you just need a vacation. Cause we didn't do a lot of vacations. We didn't talk much about self-care, even though we wanted the best for one another, but it wasn't a part of our everyday vernacular in terms of that type of conversation. So it was work, work, work. So I remember taking my first vacation, and I went over to London and Paris with my sister for about a week just to kind of de-stress, and came back and, started everything all over again. But it was when I got to New York, Dan, it was 2001. And I'd been at Arista for about a year and a half. I was in at that time, a toxic working environment.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't L.A. Reid. It was my new direct report. He was very condescending. He yelled all the time. I wasn't used to that. So that just added the level and heightened the level of stress in my life. Also, I felt like I was getting overlooked, being an African-American female for executive positions and titles. I felt and knew that I deserved the title of vice president, but I was getting overlooked constantly for that. And it just wasn't a good situation. So I remember being at the airport at LaGuardia in New York, and I was supposed to be going to Miami to cover a shoot for Babyface, a specialty shoot for Babyface. And I had a meltdown, like literally crying uncontrollably in the airport. And I remember, of course, calling my sister, who I always call whenever anything was wrong. And she was like, just quit, just walk away. And the night before that, I was talking to my boyfriend at the time, and I said, maybe I should just kill myself. Wait a minute. That scared me to death, Dan. First time in my life I ever uttered those words. And what I have not shared with the viewers is that my father died by suicide. And so I felt like, Dan, that in the back of my head, there was always this idea or notion that something was wrong with me, because we didn't talk much about suicide. And I know we're going to get to this later in the questioning, but because we didn't really address it when I was a child, when things got really tough for me, I didn't know what to do with those words and those thoughts and those feelings. That was all new for me. So that was really a tough time. And I ended up going to therapy for about 3 months, but I didn't stick with it. I felt like, okay, I kind of talked through it, and there's that. But I didn't unpack all those other layers and years of trauma that I had not dealt with from my father's suicide.
Yeah, and I know we'll get to it a little bit in terms of your matriculation, you and your sister through school, how well you did, and then going through Syracuse University and that void there. So I know we'll get to that. I just want to take a pause, and we so focus on the here and now. Just want to congratulate you on your navigation through that sector of your life in the music industry, because that is a period of time that you should be awfully proud of in terms of what you did and how you did it. So congratulations to you for that. So you're so very welcome. Thank you for your leadership in the industry. You stepped away. You eventually did step away from music to focus on mental health. Before we get into your organization and raising awareness, let's talk about your personal connection, which is unfortunately something that you and I both share. Like you, I lost a family member to suicide. Can you tell us about your experience and how it impacted you?
Absolutely. So I was 7 months old, had two siblings at the time. My sister was 8 years old. My brother was like 5.5 years old. And my mom, and the year was 1971. And my grandmother, back in the day, if you will, families kind of lived right near one another. So my grandmother had a house on the corner, and my mom and my dad had a house like right near her. So anyway, long story short, it's Sunday afternoon. My mother goes down to tell Dad that dinner's ready to come up to my grandmother's house for dinner. She walks in the house. My father was lying on the side of my sister's bed. And I think my brother and sister shared a room at the time, but it was on the side of like my sister or brother's bed, and he had shot himself in the head. And by that time, he was already dead. And of course, I was just a baby. And it's interesting. My mom told me that for the first 7 months of my life, when my dad would come home from work, I would lay on his chest. So we kind of created this instant bond between, you know, father and daughter. And so my mother said I cried for weeks after my dad died. It just could not really stop me from crying for a long time. So anyway, fast forward, once I got old enough to understand that my father was deceased and he wasn't coming back, and that he actually took his own life, you know, of course, as a child, that's still hard to grapple and understand. So I was angry and really mad at my father and didn't want to talk to my mom about it or anybody. And I was like, don't mention that man's name. I can't believe he would do that to himself and to us. And my mom was like, oh, but he loved you. But again, we never went to family counseling. We never went to therapy. And I would see my mom crying at nights, and that was just really difficult on the family. And so I think we all dealt with our own grief individually. I, of course, like hid it and stopped talking about it. And unfortunately, when you do that, especially in our culture, in our community, in the African-American community, it's gonna rear its head at some point, right? And so it reared its head when I was an adult, but I wish we had had the guidance and leadership of someone in the community to tell us, you all need to deal with this, instead of just kind of acting as if it didn't happen or just ignoring it.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you for sharing that, Shanti. And our experience has been similar in my family in terms of the loss of my contemporary. So, and she passed in 1986 by suicide. It's 2021. We still haven't talked about it. So,
sorry for your loss as well, Dan.
Thank you very much. Thank you. You've also spoken publicly about your own personal experience with anxiety, depression, and suicidal ideation. What has that journey been like for you, Shanti?
Wow. So I shared a little bit about kind of when it first reared its head in the early 2000s, and fast forward to me getting this incredible title at Universal Motown, executive vice president, which at that time there weren't a lot of women that held that title. So that was kind of a really big deal to kind of like break through that glass ceiling, if you will, for opportunities and positions within entertainment. Things were great, at least I thought, for a while. And I was making almost $500,000 a year, corner office, Range Rover, all that stuff that we think we want and need in life. And then things just really started getting to me. I think I became homesick. I was just overwhelmed with a lot of the just stress in the industry. Things that I would once kind of like brush off really started bothering me in the business, and just the hostility and the toxic environments that sometimes happen behind closed doors. I couldn't really handle that. My mother had developed dementia, which eventually turned into Alzheimer's. So I felt like all this stuff was happening back home, and I couldn't really support living while I was in New York City. And my uncle passed away, who he's like a play uncle, but for all intents and purposes, he was my uncle. He was close to my dad, and my dad had actually told him to take care of me, which is why I'm like, wow, my dad actually knew he was going to take his own life. So anyway, when my uncle passed, I felt like my world was crashing down, Dan. I literally would go into my office every day, close the door, lock it, and tell my assistant, I don't want to take any calls, unless it's an artist or unless it's my boss. And that's not who I was. Anybody that knows me knows, like, I'm a worker, and I'm not the type that would just blow off work. So something was clearly wrong, and taking a nap at 1:00 in the afternoon at the office is, definitely not good, and is a sign, right? At least I know that now. So I made the tough decision. Oh, and I also, quickly to add, this is how stressed out I was. Literally one day I was in New York City taking a taxi up to Harlem.
Yeah.
Shout out to anybody in Harlem. And my entire right side went numb, literally from head to toe. I couldn't feel my right leg, my hand, my arm. So of course it freaked me out, and I went to the doctor. I had all these tests run, ended up being diagnosed with cervical spinal stenosis. And the doctor said to me, he's like, wow, this is something that typically you get diagnosed with when you're in like your 60s, 70s, 80s, or something, very older, much older. And he attributed it to stress. And that stress started leading to depression. And I remember taking weekend trips sometimes home, and I would extend my trip to like Monday and sleep on my cousin's couch. And she was like, why are you not going back to work? And clearly I didn't want to go back in that environment. So I quit and walked away. Ended up coming, back to Atlanta, doing some marketing. I started doing marketing for soul artists like Kelly Price and Johnny Gill and others like that. And I started a live music event here called ATL Live on the Park, which was really successful for like 10 years. But still, I wasn't, really immersing myself much in music. I was trying to figure out life. Through all of this, still hadn't gone to therapy, still hadn't gotten any help, still was just like, let me figure it out on my own, right? So fast forward to 2014, my best friend died by suicide, the exact same way that my dad did. And I talked to her the day before it happened. I was on vacation in Switzerland. I had just landed, only to have to come right back to America the very next day. And of course, that was the worst flight of my life. And I blamed myself for a very long time. So that next year, Dan, between her death in August of 2014 to September of 2015, I kind of went on a downward spiral. I was high functioning though, because people, if anyone saw my timeline or social media, you would say, oh, well, you were still going to events. Yeah, I was what they call high functioning depressed, right? Or dealing with anxiety and stress and internalizing everything. And so unfortunately, things came to a head one night in September. I had counted up all the pills in my medicine cabinet, and I came close to taking those pills. And I'll say that it is, it's hard to share your narrative to so many strangers. Hello, strangers who's listening to the fact that I thought about taking my own life, but I'm not embarrassed about it anymore. This is my story. This is my journey. And if I can help one person or 1,000 people or more, that's why I'm doing what I'm doing. And I'm not ashamed. And I got the help that I needed. And here we are. And now I feel like this is my life's work and my ministry, to really, really let people know that vulnerability is a superpower, right? And it is a strength. It is not a weakness, right? And you don't have to go all on social media telling everybody your deep, dark secrets like me. But I got to a point where like, I'm going to break the cycle, and it was my sister who broke the cycle in our family. And she put herself in therapy when she was in college back in the, I think, late 80s. And so kudos to my sister for having the wherewithal to get her life together. But, okay, my name is Shanti and I had suicidal ideation, but I'm still Shanti Das. It doesn't change my legacy of what I've done in the community of Atlanta or in the entertainment industry. But it just shows that I'm human, right? And so the whole point, and that's why I'm just grateful to be sharing this platform and stage with NAMI Pennsylvania, because it is about being open and honest, right? And uncovering and unpacking those layers of vulnerability so that we can help save one another.
Shanti, thank you. This whole theme is about normalizing the conversation. So what you're doing is you're normalizing the conversation. You're absolutely right. There's superpowers in sharing your vulnerability, and I just can't thank you enough. We can't thank you enough for being vulnerable, but being incredibly strong and doing what you're doing. So I wanted to build on what you've shared so far and really ask you a few questions and have you interact with them.
Sure.
Did you, when you were navigating this in terms of the anxiety and the suicidal ideation, did you have people you could talk with? Did you seek professional help? And when did you realize that you needed help? And what was the process like for you?
So I'm going to kind of start backwards, right, with your last question. So I didn't seek professional help initially, but it was the night that I contemplated taking my own life that I knew something wasn't right. So when I called my sister that night, she convinced me to call the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, which most of us know is 1-800-273-TALK. And they kind of talked me through that crisis moment, if you will, for about 20 or 30 minutes. And then I also, in that same time frame, texted my pastor, Dr. Raphael G. Warnock, who is also Senator Warnock now from the great state of Georgia. And he said, I'll pray with you, but you got to get help. You have to go to the doctor. And he knew, and so did several other people at Ebenezer, because they would see me coming, and that was pre-pandemic, see me coming into the church and crying every Sunday. Something was clearly going on. And I was fighting these mental demons, if you will, in my head and not really navigating through it. And so I called my doctor and I got connected to a psychiatrist and started on Zoloft. I like to call my happy pills. And I probably took the antidepressants maybe 3 or 4 months
Mm-hmm.
and then weaned myself off of them. I probably should have continued taking them for a while, but and then I started opening up and sharing on social media, as well as at live events when I would speak and so forth. And so I kind of use that as a way of self-care. I won't say as a way of therapy, because
Mm-hmm.
therapy is obviously a much more serious process. And so so it took me a while to get to deal with go to talk therapy rather, but I used my platform and started sharing. And so, and now I would say it's been almost what 6 years now, and or 6 or going on 7 years, and I'm doing a lot better. I've seen several therapists. I am in therapy again now,
Mm-hmm.
and just recently, and we'll talk a little bit more about why I'm back in therapy. But being able to be open and sharing, and then just doing this work has really helped me pour back into myself. Now, it's also interesting because my pastor also introduced me to this term, the wounded healer. So I also have to make sure, Dan, that I am still taking care of myself from an emotional health and wellness perspective, because as I try to heal others, there's still a lot that I'm dealing with from a healing perspective.
Yeah, the wounded healer. Maybe we can come back to that, Shanti, because I think for many of us, we try to help others, and we're probably in that same group, the wounded healer.
Exactly.
As you have shared, were family and friends accepting as you started to share, and how did family and friends interact and react?
So my sister, of course, who was like my best friend and everything, of course she was very empathetic, and very supportive in terms of trying to get me, help, right, and to deal with it. I did not open up to a ton of other family members because I wasn't sure how they would take it. Interestingly enough, my brother didn't truly learn about it until like a year later. I kind of hid it from him. My brother, we're different and we see things differently in life. And so I don't know if I was just afraid or I didn't know how he would, handle it or what have you. So I didn't really share a lot with him. But some of my other really close friends were concerned and supportive, but didn't really have a lot of input in terms of where to go to get the help. So that's why I kind of immersed myself in this culture, in this wellness culture, and other like-minded mental health advocates, right? And started, surrounding myself with some women in Atlanta who had similar experiences. One lady, her son had attempted suicide. He's still alive today, thank God, but he has a traumatic brain disorder. Another young woman's daughter took her life at 13. Another young lady suffered from severe depression and anxiety, and both of her parents died, not by suicide, but just passed away. So, like, the grief and a lot of things had really led to her emotional health and wellness challenges. So, I created my own little niche and community of folks to support me in an authentic way. So, I think that really helped me. And then over time, I was able to share more with other friends and families to get them to really understand what I was going through. I've had a couple of my close male friends tell me, I didn't really understand what you were going through, or I didn't really get it. And I didn't really understand that we can, that all of us, can suffer from mental health challenges, and that you really opened up the door, for me to even think about wellness in my life in a more authentic way.
Yeah, as the World Health Organization coined the phrase, I guess about 20, 21 years ago, maybe 22 now, there is no physical health without mental health. But,
Correct.
we as a society, we judge a book by its cover, and we never get back behind the table of contents to really understand how people are doing. Love what you shared about Pastor Warnock and, our faith community, the leaders in the faith community. They are our first responders, and it's
Hmm.
so important that we're appreciating them, but that we open up and talk with them. So kudos to you for that. You
Thank
faced a lot of hardship, and you just mentioned self care and therapy. Would you share with us what you've learned about caring for your mental health following tragedy? And you mentioned two things: self-care therapy. So can you kind of take us through that a little bit? And yeah.
Sure, absolutely. Thanks. So I'll start with therapy. I fought therapy for a long time. Maybe because I worked in entertainment and shaped the careers of a lot of artists, and it was my own ego that got in the way.
Mm-hmm.
And people that know me know that, like, I'm a pretty humble chick. Like, I, take pride in, trying to be the same person that I was, just from a basic human perspective. Growing up, I don't think I'm better than anyone because of what, life has allowed me to experience. But in terms of work, I'm very much, a stickler for working hard and being career driven. And so I guess when it came to my life, I was like, well, surely if I can fix the careers and market the careers of everyone else, I can fix myself, right? That's an ignorant statement. I know that now, but that's kind of how I thought. So it was really, my sister would just say to me, "You really need to go to therapy." I'm just saying, you really need to consider therapy. She would say that over and over and over again. And of course, it just went over my head. So again, I went when I was in the early 2000s, as I mentioned, in New York City. And then it took me really understanding that if I'm gonna talk the talk, I better walk the walk. I can't have this organization called Silence the Shame if I'm not silencing my own shame and not going to therapy. So I've tried therapy over the years,
Mm-hmm.
since, starting this organization. And I've had a couple different, therapists, and it took me a couple of years to find the best therapist for me. And now, as I mentioned, I am back in therapy. So I understand the importance of therapy. And it's not like, and I've learned this too, it's not like my therapist is going to solve all my problems, y'all. Please don't think that just because you go to therapy, that it is the responsibility of your therapist to make your life better. No, it doesn't go. It's not a one-way street. It takes two people to tango. So you have to do the
Mm-hmm.
work in therapy. If your
Mm-hmm.
therapist gives you homework or tells you to journal or do things, you got to do it. Or you got to also understand, kind of bringing self-care into the conversation, Dan, that self-care is something that you have to deal with on a regular basis. It's not like something that you do, just once a week, right?
Mm-hmm.
It should be a part of your daily regimen. And so, I put these 10 quick tips together for saying yeah to wellness. And I know we're going to talk about my personal brand, Yeah Wellness, but I'll just tell you really quickly, because this is how I do self-care in my life.
Okay.
So number one, when I say yeah to wellness, is paying close attention to my feelings. So I coined this acronym for the word rap, because I figured, I started in hip hop. So rap. I'm going to rap through my problems. Well, what does that mean? Well, rapping through your problems means, the R in rap is recognizing the unfamiliar and abnormal feelings that you may be experiencing. Because, sometimes some things will happen and we'll do things and you'll just blow it off and act like it didn't happen. Well, you got
Mm-hmm.
to be able to recognize, those unfamiliar feelings when they happen. And the A is for acknowledging them. Say, okay, it did happen. But guess what? I also have to accept those feelings, that something is not quite right, right? So I accepted it. And then how do I deal with it? The P in RAP is processing through those feelings with what? A licensed mental health professional and therapist. You got to rap through your problems, but you can't do it on your own, right? You need to deal with the folks that were actually trained, right, to be able to help you through these situations. And so
Yeah.
number two is paying attention to what you eat. I've dealt with a lot of physical health issues this year, but I also recognize that so much of what you eat can also affect your emotional health and wellness. And, having a diet that's full of sugar is going to weigh you down. It's going to cause you to be depressed and anxious at times. So making sure that, you decrease your sugar intake and that you're getting enough sleep. The third thing is rest is revolutionary. It's a phrase that I use so much, and it's so important to get the proper rest that you need. Number four is understanding that no, those two little letters, exclamation point, period, whatever you want to use. It's a complete sentence. You can't be everything to everyone. And since I've understood that, it's helped me a lot. And that flows into number five, that boundaries are what? A blessing. Boundaries are a blessing. So being able to say no and set up those and establish those boundaries in my personal life and my professional life, it has alleviated a lot of my stress and anxiety for myself. And number 6 is asking yourself who's in your starting 5. We're in basketball season. The Philadelphia 76ers cannot get on the court and start a game unless it's 5 players on the court. So you need 5 players on your court in life on your mental health and wellness journey. Just identify 5 people that you feel like you can call that will really understand you and come from a place of empathy and not sympathy. Because when we're going through things, we don't need folks to feel sorry for us. We just kind of need you to understand what we're going through and help us through it. Number 7 is making self-care a part of your daily regimen. As I mentioned, it could be meditation, it could be prayer, it could be working out, walking, listening to music. A lot of times I just turn on my music and do my best Beyonce or what have you, or Adele, and just, sing to my little heart's content. But it alleviates the stress and it makes me feel better. Number 8 is don't be ashamed to ask for help. Talk to someone if you need to. And number 9 is don't be afraid to see a therapist. And then number 10 is mental and physical wellness is a lifestyle. It really is a lifestyle. And I know you mentioned earlier what the WHO coined, there is no, physical health without mental health. But yeah. I'd say also that mental and physical wellness is a lifestyle. It really goes hand in hand. So that's kind of what I do from a self-care perspective and a lot of the tips that I share around wellness and therapy.
Shanti, I felt like you were talking to me. So in addition to many in the audience, as you talked about self-care, as you talked about rest and pay attention to what you eat, boundaries are blessings, and no with an exclamation point, and it's so much that you just spoke to that speaks to me. And I know it speaks to everyone in our audience. So, thank you. And hopefully we'll be able to get this from you so we can share it with everyone electronically. This is fantastic. Now, Shanti, let me ask you something, because I'm going to go off of script just for a second. I know I've been in situations with you where you are so enthralled in helping others that you will do for others before you do for yourself. You will say, "Oh, let me introduce you to this," or "Let me." Oh, you would like. Oh, you're doing for others. How are you kind of doing for Shanti as you are doing for others? And when you mentioned rest is revolutionary, I just want to come back to that, because a part of your DNA is silence the shame. It's doing for others. It always has been. It's just a part of who you are. So how are you kind of balancing that polarity of doing for others and doing for Shanti?
Yeah, so it's funny. My mom, when we were growing up, I remember going to church with her. We grew up Catholic, and on the way to church, my mom would stop and feed the gentleman, the homeless men living under the bridge. And so, small act of kindness, but yet it really instilled something in me as a young age. And so, even though I was hired to work in the entertainment industry, it was still an act of service, if you will, for helping to launch the careers of others. And then when I moved back home and was dealing with a lot of stress and anxiety, it's funny how God can, not to impose my faith on anyone, but it's funny how God can push you in other directions. So I started doing more community service to help me feel better, maybe about some of the things I was experiencing. So yeah, I have always been that person that I try to put others first before myself. And I learned that from my sister. But to your point, you do have to take care of yourself. And I'll say the last 2.5 years have been, I was in a pandemic before 2020. And I've gotten better with talking about it, but if I shed a tear, y'all, just get some Kleenex. It's okay. My sister died unexpectedly in 2019, and it's okay. I celebrate her name. Her name is Anjali Maria Das Arnold. I honor her name today. She was my everything. And because my mother has Alzheimer's, and because, every mom is different. I love my mom, and our moms represent different things in our lives, right? And so my mother provided a roof over our head, love. She instilled spirituality in us and taught us to be really good people. But it was my sister who was that go-getter and really instilled work ethic in me, and she helped to shape the person that I was and am today. And so she was my best friend, the matriarch of my family, my sister, my confidant. She knew everything about me. And so it really shook me to the core. And I found myself digressing a lot in 2019 and going back into a depression. And it was a really, really tough year for me. I did go through a process called Grief Share. It's like grief counseling. Griefshare.org is from a Christian perspective, and it helped me out a lot. It was some in-person support groups that I attended. Still didn't go back into therapy. Shame on me. I should have, but I think it was just hard accepting, right? Because there are different stages of grief, and it took me a long time to accept the fact, because it was unexpected, and she was on vacation in Mexico with her family, and I had a blood clot. So anyway, that was a tremendous setback for me. But I am taking care of myself now, Dan, by, again, establishing those boundaries for myself, being back in therapy. I love to travel. Travel makes me feel really good. This year, I had another setback with physical health issues. I had gallbladder disease. And so I've been in and out of the hospital this year. And I've never been this physically sick. And being this sick without my sister and my number one has also been challenging. And so I just try to take my own advice that I share with other people. I'm an open book. I'll tell y'all, from one day to the next, things could change. I had a crappy day yesterday. I'm still dealing with some health challenges that I'm working through, physical health challenges, that is. And I said, let me get up and get out of the house, right? And pour back into my mental wellness this evening from a self-care perspective. And so I went to dinner with friends, and it made me feel better. So I really work hard on pushing myself to do what I know is best around my mental health and wellness. But every day I have to encourage myself, whether that's sticky notes in the house or, staying closely connected with friends. I try to make sure that I don't isolate myself so much, because that could be a trigger for me.
Thank you, Shanti, and so sorry for your loss. And I remember the opportunity that was before us for me to have met your sister that didn't occur. So, our heart goes out to you and in the memory of your sister. So thank you. What's been your biggest obstacle regarding mental health, and how have you overcome it?
Stubbornness. I was stubborn for years and did not, like I mentioned earlier, want to go to therapy. And I would probably say fear. Because I think a lot of us are fearful of, if we do find the strength and courage to go to therapy, what does that mean for us, right? And what are we going to unpack, and what is that going to uncover? Because no one wants to feel like something is quote unquote wrong with them.
Yeah.
And so I think it was fear for me. But I've been able to overcome that. And I think you said this conversation was centered around finding pathways forward.
Yeah.
And I would like to say forward through fear, right? I'm finding ways forward through my fear. And so that is kind of how I did it. And there's still times, even with the physical health scares, scared of what I might find, but talking through it with my therapist and just working on, being my best self. And, I am a very spiritual person. And so allowing myself to do things that can calm me, right? Whether that's meditation or journaling, and finding ways to navigate through that space of fear. And so I just try to put one step forward every day. And I just say this mental health and physical health journey, life is truly a journey, and every day is different. And so I have to just try to use these, I write things down, and I try to refer back to notes. And I saw someone ask, Krista asked, will there be handouts available? I encourage people to refer back to, great conversations that you hear from people, or things that you learn, or articles that you read. Write stuff down. I'm a little old school. Yeah, you can put it in your phone, but get a journal and just write stuff down and highlight stuff. I'm that girl. And so I just take it one day at a time, and try to focus on being my best self that particular day. Because again, I do share a lot. In addition to being the founder of Silence to Shame, I am a public speaker.
Yeah.
So I've spoken all around the world around mental health and wellness. And so it is important that I do take time for Shanti. So I love Christmas. This girl loves Christmas. So as you can see, I've already started decorating. So I find little ways to just make me happy. Because somebody came to my house the other day and they were like, "Oh my God, your house is already decorated." And I said, hey, hold on. It's something that I need for my own health and wellness. So when I walk downstairs and I feel the spirit, it puts me in a better mood. So I say to you all listening, find out what puts you in your happy place. Find that inner child, right? That's going to make you happy, and figure out what's going to make you, click and stick. So
This is fantastic. Thank you for being so open and sharing, Shanti. And that is who you are. So let me give a little backdrop, because we want to get to the name, Silence the Shame. But 1 in 5 U.S. adults experience a mental health condition, but the average delay between symptom onset and treatment is 11 years. We know this. Some never get help at all. One of the biggest reasons is shame and stigma. In 2017, you created Silence the Shame, which is a movement aimed at normalizing the conversation about mental health. Can you tell us about how you went about starting Silence the Shame? And then why did you decide to use shame in the name as opposed to stigma?
yeah, absolutely. So I'll say I started this organization because it was one day I was doing an interview in Atlanta, Georgia, on one of the largest urban radio stations, V103. And there was a guy named Ryan Cameron who was on the morning show, I think, at the time. And it was around the time when Bobby Brown's daughter took ill, Bobby Christina, the late Bobby Christina. And so it was a lot of rumors swirling, and people didn't know if, she had overdosed or tried to, bring harm upon herself.
Mm-hmm.
And so it just started these conversations on the show that day around mental health, right? Again, at a time where we weren't hearing mental health, those two words, as much as we do now, right, in 2021. So I came on the show. I started talking about my father. Brian even opened up about some things in his life. And I said, yeah, what's the big deal? I don't know what the big deal is. We just need to silence the shame. And I thought, once a marketer, Dan, always a marketer. So I was like, okay, silence the shame. I was like, mental note. I'm like, okay, God, I hear you. You dropping gems right now. Let me just make a little mental side note.
Mm-hmm.
And so I ended up just started sharing more and kind of using that phrase. So I created a hashtag, silence your shame. So whenever I would post, I was really intentional about the hashtag that I use. And so May is Mental Health Awareness Month, as we all know. So in 2017, I said, you know what? I am going to make up my own day. Yes, I'm going to just create National Silence Shame Day, even though it's Cinco de Mayo, before people are out there taking a shot. Let's see if they'll post about mental health. Made a little graphic for social media. Guess what, Dan? I thought maybe we get a few posts, just some people supporting. We had 90 million impressions in one day. I had everybody from Candy Burris to Outkast, Usher, Nick Cannon, actors, Tisha Campbell, Holly Robinson Peete, all these people posting Silence the Shame in one day. And I thought, okay, wait a minute. This is bigger than what I know. So later that year, we ended up establishing the organization. It was initially called the Hip Hop Professional Foundation because I had done a lot of community service work. Mm-hmm. And so I had written a book in 2011 about my career as a woman in entertainment, and I called it the Hip Hop Professional. But when Silence the Shame, that movement started taking off, my board of directors was like, you should really change the name because I think you're on to something. And so we changed the name to Silence the Shame, and we formed our first partnership with Jack and Jill of America Incorporated. And we did a 7-city teen mental health tour in African-American communities and brought teens together and parents and leaders and other cultural influencers to openly address emotional health and wellness in their specific communities. Since then, that's kind of how we got connected. I've done work with Grady, the Grady healthcare system here in Atlanta, and several people connected us, and we've been awarded awards from the American Psychiatric Association Foundation. We were NAMI's, I forgot the name of the award, but we were honored by NAMI, the Multicultural Award from NAMI. Last year during the pandemic, I was named a mental health care hero from Essence Magazine. I've spoken at Essence Festival and we've done just some great work. We also did a partnership last year. We were the mental health charitable partner for the NFL Players Association.
Mm-hmm.
That relationship continues. We're doing work with the AIDS Healthcare Foundation. Right now, Amazon just awarded us $50,000. We're about to start doing some work with Amazon, and the list goes on. We take pride in doing community conversations, and I moderate a lot of those talks. And
Yeah.
there's a lot of people doing panels and discussions, and I just feel like I try to really have a down home approach. Maybe it's that Southern Belle and that Georgia peach in me of having conversations that are a little bit more palatable for folks. We just launched this past Sunday an initiative that I came up with called Silence to Shame Sunday Dinners. And so I remember what the Sunday dinner meant from a cultural perspective
Mm-hmm.
in our community. And so we brought together 8 community leaders to break bread and have authentic conversations around the table. And so it's a pilot, and we hope to take these Silence to Shame Sunday dinners to other communities. Maybe we'll come to Pennsylvania and other places throughout the nation. But we're just trying to meet folks where they're at, right? We've done work with faith communities, especially in rural Georgia and some of the churches. And so we are just trying to, be a part of this collective effort and group to normalize the conversation and to find pathways forward as we continue to silence the shame. And lastly, I use the word shame instead of stigma because, one, I didn't really know a lot about the word stigma. It didn't come up in everyday conversation for me. And I just knew how ashamed I was that my dad died and how he died. And I just wanted to use that to overcome, my own guilt and shame. I didn't want to be ashamed of my dad anymore. I wanted to celebrate my dad and his memory. And so I decided we use that word shame. And then my graphic designer, who's a buddy of mine who worked at Arista Records with us, who is a world-renowned fine artist, he created our logo and put that line through shame so that we no longer could be ashamed about mental health.
It's a wonderful tag, and it's a wonderful logo. So this will be obvious, but why was your organization needed, and how are you educating and raising awareness? I think you spoke to that a little bit.
Yeah, I did speak to a lot of it. Yeah, so it was just needed because we see these rates increases. I know it takes several years before we get new statistics out in our communities. But I think, now African-American youth, might be I think the second largest demographic in terms of suicide attempts. It's just that people are suffering, so many. We see our kids and babies and hear folks say, oh, they're bad or they're acting out. But why are they bad and why are they acting out? Let's get to the root of the problem that's going on. And a lot of families are hurting. And again, we've opened up Pandora's box, with the pandemic. I don't care if you're Black, white, Asian, Hispanic, whatever community you're from, LGBTQ plus IA, we all experience or can experience mental health challenges. As I always say, we all have mental health. We may not all have a mental illness, but sometimes we could be one traumatic experience away from it. And so it's needed. And I am proud of the fact that we were, leading this charge, especially in communities of color, before it became a thing, if you will. And I say that, I don't throw that out loosely, but it is, everybody's talking about it. We're seeing the conversations everywhere. But what's important is that how do we take people from, just talking to taking action, right? And so what we want to make sure is we're getting folks to take action, because I know how long it took for me. When I started learning about it, I told you I still wasn't in therapy. ED, executive director of Silence to Shame, still going through my own trauma, but still wasn't in therapy on a regular basis. So it takes time. So that is why it is important for partnerships like Silence to Shame and NAMI and other organizations that, we're all in this fight together and doing great work individually, but just the collective energy is really important as we forge forward and figure out what it looks like in a world where we can truly erase stigma and we see these rates decline. We do have to work together. So, and I'll just lastly add, we're working on establishing some Silence to Shame campus chapters at HBCUs as well as other universities. So we want to pour back into the younger generation. I also established, which we're in the final stages now of leadership trainings called Young Black and Well and Young Brown and Well. So that just like, you have leadership academies that are going to help you from, an educational perspective. We want to do a leadership academy from a wellness perspective as you are preparing to go to these great schools or take these Fortune 500 jobs, that you also can be trained through Young Black and Well and Young Brown and Well, our leadership academy. So, and we have a podcast. We have almost 50 episodes up. I'm the host of the podcast. So we're doing a lot of really cool stuff, and still trying to get fully funded. People think we're this multi-million-dollar organization with an office in Atlanta. We have 5 staff members, several volunteers, and we're still, raising money from an operations perspective. But I'm not going to stop now. We've come too far. And I feel like, it'll all come together and we'll be able to continue to do this great work.
Yeah, you can't stop, and you just have to keep it going. And it is about collaboration and building coalitions and partnerships. So yeah, well put, Shanti. As you're interacting with our Black youth, what have you been hearing in conversations with them in terms of some of our generation, older generation, it's shame. Some of our young people, it may be different. What are you hearing from them in terms of their receptivity as well as what they've experienced over this last 18 months?
So great question. I've actually done a lot of talks with youth in the Black community, whether it's high school aged or college age youth. They're all going through it, Dan. Experiencing anxiety, depression, recognizing those unfamiliar feelings, like I mentioned earlier, like they've never experienced before. A lot of them are open and talking about it. I will say, unlike my mom and her generation, this younger generation definitely is more open to sharing and say, hey, I have something going on from a mental health perspective. But it's taking that next step, taking those action steps, like I mentioned, of actually getting the help. I think a lot of them are afraid. A lot of them aren't as trusting with the process, of therapy. So we're trying to get them to understand why therapy is important, why it matters. I'm doing a keynote also, or not a keynote, but a talk that I'm spearheading tomorrow for a school system here in Georgia. 12-year-old African-American female died by suicide 2 nights ago. It's heartbreaking. Our babies are dying and they're struggling, and we've got to do more. We've got to take mental health and wellness into the classrooms. But that's the thing too. See, what I'm understanding is you can't just train the student and not train the parents, right? And some of them are being raised by Big Mama, by Pop. The mother might be on drugs, or the father is absent from the home, or vice versa, because I'm not just placing the onus on men not being present. Sometimes the woman isn't present in the home. But it's a lot going on from a community perspective. And of course, we could also trace a lot of those issues to social determinants of health and things that, lack of healthcare, lack of access to therapy. Other thing I'm hearing, that therapy is too expensive for them. They can't afford it. They're not on their mom's insurance, or their insurance lapsed and they don't know how to get the help. So it's a lot going on. That is why this work continues. That is why this work is so important, that we got to get to the kids who want to talk about it. But now let's figure out how they can get help. But we got to train mom and daddy and auntie and Uncle Ray Ray and everybody, or Uncle Jim, Uncle Bob, and let them know why it's important that your child needs therapy. Right? Because some of the older generation, or even I'm 50 years old, still don't recognize or understand the importance of therapy until it hits their household, their individual household. So there's still a lot of work to be done, Dan. We are making strides, but we got to get our young folks to be able to take that next step and get the help. Also fight for policy changes, make sure that the schools are getting funded so they can have therapists maybe in schools instead of, or in addition to counselors, if you will, right? Because there's only so much some of the school counselors can do. So it's a really, that's a open-ended question, honestly, but I am glad that some of the school systems are recognizing the importance of it, and we're starting to do more work. But listen, it's a lot of mental health organizations out there doing great work, but it's a lot of more problems. So the journey
Yeah.
continues, and that's
And
why it is important for us to collaborate at times, or to just individually keep pushing and doing the best that we can, so we don't lose another young person or older person to suicide. That is why I do this work. I just, it breaks my heart, and I'm an empath, so it brings me down when I hear that someone else has died by suicide, especially in our community. When I know that help is there, but we the fight continues.
Shanti, thank you. What we're seeing in communities of color amongst our young people is, and we have 5 values, and one of those is inclusion, and the other one is hope. And I would say that in the community, we're seeing a lot of young people that are hopeless, and we want them to be hopeful. And
Mm-hmm.
we're trying to find ways that they are hopeful when in fact they're feeling hopeless.
Yeah.
And that hopelessness has come from a lot of places. And for everyone, the last year and a half has been characterized by fear, uncertainty, and doubt. But the pandemic and the national reckoning with racial trauma and police brutality since the murder of George Floyd has had a disproportionate impact on people of color. And as a result, we've been having more conversations about racism and mental health. How is Silence the Shame addressing the layers of pain that so many Black youth and adults are feeling as a result of all the trauma from the past 18 months?
Great question. It's an important question because the trauma continues in our community, with the trial that's ongoing right now, in the state of Georgia, and around the nation, other things. One of the things we're trying to do is, again, bring information to the community. So we curated several conversations, community conversations around racial trauma and mental health in the Black community with experts, expert clinicians, expert psychologists. Again, trying to just move the needle and keep those conversations going. We, again, podcast discussions, and just trying to bring the information, to the communities, and as much collaboration as we can do. One of the things we're doing is we're partnering with the Atlanta Hawks, to do a teen wellness clinic. And, sometimes, we can have these presentations and conversations and deal with it head on. But with the youth, sometimes you got to, again, going back to meeting them where they're at, right? So we're going to engage with some athletes and some artists and have like a teen summit, but in a way that's easier for them to digest, right? And so we'll allow them to ask questions. And whenever we do teen events, we always allow them to be a part of the process. Because I've seen, times where you do a panel discussion and you just have all the experts and then you say 5 minutes for Q&A. That doesn't work. So when we do events, like we did an event with NAMI just about a month ago or
Mm-hmm.
3 weeks ago at Clark
Mm-hmm.
Atlanta University, and thank you to you and your team for allowing us to curate that with you. The entire men's basketball team was there, which was fantastic. But what we did was we gave more time for Q&A because, again, it's a conversation, right? A conversation is 2-way, not 1-way. So we don't want to just be these older adults just throwing out and spewing all this information, and you're losing them. You got to make them a part of what you're doing. So we try to curate events that are thoughtful in a way that the students and the youth feel like they are a part of it. Whenever I go speak at colleges, I just recently spoke at Stetson University. I did TSU. I did Georgia Tech, and I'm doing some other schools. But I always request that a student leader be a part of the panel with us, because one thing I've learned is that, and I don't know as much about, obviously NAMI has done a great job of putting these peer-to-peer programs together, but what I do understand is that the youth listen to the youth. I'm 50 years old. I might get a pass sometimes because I let them call me Auntie Shanti. So I have them address me as Auntie Shanti, right? So that makes it a little bit easier. But they want to hear from one another, right? And they take inspiration and guidance from their peers. And so we always try to make sure that the youth are a part of it. So being able to train youth to train others is extremely important, right? And so that's just a little bit of what we're doing, to address some of those problems. And I just want to thank Lisa and Carol for your comments and so many other wonderful comments. Thank you, ladies. I'm inspired by you all for being here as well.
Yeah, thank you, Shanti. Did you always see yourself as being a leader in the mental health field?
No, not at all. You could not tell me that I would be, because the funny thing, Dan, is, I did music and I still, stay in contact with a lot of my peers from music and stuff, and had a great run and grateful for that opportunity. So I would be like sometimes randomly in the airport and folks will come up to me and say, Outcast, I've seen you on that famous picture, or TLC, or da 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 da. Now, sometimes I'm walking through the airport or at Target. I had this woman stop me in Target not too long ago, and she said, "You're the Silence to Shame lady." And I said, yeah, I guess so. And so, it's pretty cool. I never thought that I would be leading the charge in such a meaningful way. And I'm truly humbled by this experience. But again, I have to go back to my faith that I can't place too much glory for me, because I have to give all glory to God, because he caught me at a really vulnerable and tough time in my life and pulled me out of the valley. And that's the important thing when we're dealing with our challenges in mental health. We go through the lulls, right? And the peaks and valleys. I was deep in the valley, and God brought me up out of the valley. And that's why I do the work that I do, so that people know it's okay not to be okay. But what's not okay is to stay in the valley. So it's an honor to be able to do this work. I love it. I approach it like I'm marketing a record or a music project. That's why I've been able to do some cool stuff and synergies with music artists, and the work that we're doing at Sony Music. I think you're going to ask us about that, but I just approach it as this fun thing. It's just trying to bring mental health to the world in a way that's, again, more palatable.
Yeah, we are going to. Thank you. And, you mentioned growing up Catholic, so that's with the catechism. But as you talk about your faith, and we won't go there, but I think that what we're talking about now is a parable of talents. And what you're doing is you're bringing all of your talents to the table. So this is a calling. So, kudos for you for what you're doing. In terms of, you're welcome, but thank you from us. Through your company, Yale Wellness, you conducted a series of interviews with celebrities like Ludacris and Common on YouTube during the pandemic. Can you tell us a little bit about it?
Absolutely. So, and you can go to YouTube and click Yale Wellness, YEAH, and pull up some of the videos. So I think, Dan, going to back to that word fear, I was scared like everybody else. And I was trying to figure out what I was going to do, because a lot of my speaking engagements were getting canceled. I think the last speaking engagement I had done around mental health was at Syracuse University, March 7th. That was the last flight that I took. So being back home, I was like, what am I going to do? I was just really getting out there and building my brand, my personal brand on the side. And I was afraid. And I said, well, everybody's home doing the same thing. I need to do something about it. And so I was inspired by my friend D Nice, who started Club Quarantine. And I was actually one of the first 200 people that was in Club Quarantine the day he started it in his kitchen. And so it was nice to see that, to see how it, oh gosh, why am I losing my train of thought? How it progressed, how it progressed over the pandemic. And so, anyway, so I said, let me just get on. I don't like to necessarily talk on Instagram, but I'll get on and ask a couple of friends how they're feeling. And so I started asking Ludacris and Swiss Beats, and I talked to Candy Burris and D Nice and Chuck D from Public Enemy and Dansby Swanson from the Atlanta Braves, who just won a World Series. And all these folks said yes. And it just became a thing. And so I created the Yale Wellness Check-In. And it was a way also to help me, Dan, because I was isolated. I was, living at home by myself. And, you get in your mind, how the young kids say, oh, I'm all up in my thoughts and in my feelings. And so I just found a way to kind of like navigate through my own stress and anxiety, but more importantly, find a way to stay connected, right? Because we know that in mental health and wellness, it's important to have that level of community and connectivity. And so being able to start those Instagram live conversations allowed me to stay connected. And so what ended up happening, a lot of companies saw that I was doing Instagram live And they started hiring me to do virtual lunch and learns. And so I did talks for EA Sports, for Warner Media, I mean, Def Jam Records, like all types of companies, Google, Spotify, and I'm still doing it. And so sharing my story and journey. And it ended up, God has a funny sense of humor. I thought that, woe is me, but, I did okay in the pandemic, trying to pour into others and ended up getting blessed, in return.
Yeah.
So it was a win-win.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah. You mentioned a couple of things you're working on right now in terms of on the Sunday events, but we also heard that there's a new Silence the Shame partnership with Sony Music Publishing and soundtrack of mental health. Can you tell us a little bit more about that? And do you have any other projects or goals that you're looking forward to?
Sure. So a good friend of mine, John Platt, is the chairman and CEO of Sony Music Publishing. We actually started in the entertainment business together in the 90s. And so, as a result of what happened with a lot of the racial injustice in the pandemic, Sony Music created a social justice fund, and they made Silence and Shame a part of that. And so I came up with the idea, and then my executive director, Jewel Gooding, built out the programming around Soundtrack of Mental Health. And essentially, their workplace wellness trainings. They're 60-minute trainings, and we train them around self-care, around being an executive and talking to your staff in the workplace, and understanding behavioral mental health. And so we just created like 4 or 5 different training sessions. And so our goal is to train over 10,000 people in the entertainment industry by the year 2023. I know that doesn't sound like a ton in terms of the folks, but it's a great start, right? And so we also are going to launch globally. So we're in the process of getting translators and different folks that can help us translate these programs so we can take it to other territories in different countries like Japan and the UK and so forth. And so we're truly, truly excited about that. And as I mentioned, next year, just again, working on our college programs. We're going to have our gala coming up, and we're going to go back and mix and blend with the entertainment community. So we want to do a lot around arts and culture and mental health. We're working on an app for Silence the Shame that hopefully will launch in 2023. So just a lot of different things, a lot of ways that we can continue, bringing the messaging to the communities. The one thing I will say is also, so we have the soundtrack of mental health for entertainment. We're working on the playbook of mental health for the sports community. And so we're going to work on training athletes and other companies in sports through the playbook of mental health.
You know what? You just have a few things going on, just a few.
And I'm really not even naming everything. That's just all I can remember this morning.
I know. So this is fantastic. And as you were talking about therapy earlier, I thought about it, and when you have a knee surgery or something, and you say, "Oh, I've got to go to physical therapy," nobody thinks a second thought about it. But when you say, I'm going to therapy, there's a connotation with it that's very different, and that's part of silencing the shame and moving forward. So appreciate everything you're doing, and there's been some aha moments for me in this as well. We want to get to some questions, but any closing thoughts before we get to the questions that you'd like to leave the audience with that we haven't kind of talked to or have been?
No, I mean, again, it's just an honor to be able to do this work. I am grateful that I'm in a place where I truly recognize the importance of therapy and what it can do in my life. I have therapy today at 3:00. That's kind of like my ongoing day and schedule now. And all I can say to anyone who is doing this work or have people that are experiencing the challenges, just try to work from a place of patience. I have a family member that has a more severe mental illness, and we're in a tough situation right now because they're not responding to me. Their direct family member is the only one that they're talking to now, and we're trying to figure out how to really connect with them and get them better help. So, it's still really challenging in terms of dealing with severe mental illness, and I just wish that we had better facilities and things in place. Like I wish that, you know how you have assisted living facilities for the
Yeah.
elderly community? I
Yeah.
really wish there were assisted living facilities, more of them. I mean, I think there's some programs that exist in different pockets of the nation, but we need more facilities for people to be able to live and thrive who have a severe mental illness, and more resources for that. So that's something that I want to tackle moving forward. And I would love to have silence to shame wellness centers, similar to like a boys and girls club, but where
Yeah.
there was or maybe we partner with, boys and girls club or the YMCAs across the nation, where there is a silence to shame center within those centers. Because I recognize that so many organizations now who might not have talked about mental health in the past are talking about it now. So rather than them try to reinvent the wheel, my hope and prayer is that they partner with the NAMIs of the world or Silence to Shames of the world. And so there is this collaboration to build out these wellness centers, either where they're in existing centers or freestanding centers. Because one thing I know is that, this conversation around mental health is not a fad. It's not a thing. It's not going anywhere. And we got to continue to silence the shame in our communities and really, get people the help that they need. It's a lot of work to be done. It's great that celebrities and folks are starting to talk about it, but we're just scratching the surface, Dan.
I
Just scratching.
know, I know. You mentioned young people and insurance and them getting care. One of the things I wanted to mention is also, we'll get your insight in terms of the demand for mental health care it's just gone
Skyrocketed.
up. It's skyrocketed. The supply of behavioral health therapists, of psychologists, the supply of the talent pool is so low.
It
What are
is,
you
and they're overworked.
and then for the behavioral health community, the that is one that we have to look at from the standpoint of how are we compensating them, because many of them are going out the back door while we're trying to bring new in the front door, but we're not
Yep.
paying them enough. So
Right.
what are you hearing as you're going across communities, and are you hearing about the conversation about workforce development and pipeline development of new young people to come into this body of work? What are you hearing?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we know that statistic. I think it's what, less than 5% of clinicians are clinicians of color.
Hmm.
And sometimes people that seek therapy have issues when you talk about cultural competency. I actually experienced that. No disrespect to one of my therapists, but I just felt like he couldn't relate and it wasn't working for me. And so I wanted to find someone who looked like me and shared similar experiences. And so one of the things that we have to do is we have to encourage young people to realize that psychiatry and psychology are viable career tracks and career paths.
Hmm.
And so, excuse me, that's why we want to get on these campuses and encourage more young folks, to go into these fields. Because when they get into therapy, they want someone who can relate from a cultural perspective. So I'm
Hmm.
hearing a lot of chatter, about how we, again, encourage, universities to make sure that these majors, are within their curriculum. And that we really encourage the students to want to be able to do this work. That's why, like, I feel like God don't make no mistakes. So someone mentioned that, and I humbly share this, that they love my passion and enthusiasm. But that's a gift from God. The fact that I can be so passionate about mental health and share it in a way that I almost am like a cheerleader for mental health, right? This unofficial queen bee cheerleader for mental health. Like, you got to have more of that to be able to really get folks pumped up and excited and have them want to be able to take on, this career path, because it's heavy. Because we have this running joke. One of the therapists that I know and work with, they're like, "Does your therapist have a therapist?" So we got to make sure that we're pouring back in to the therapists and psychiatrists who are doing this heavy work, so that they continue to do that work, right? So I'm just trying to make sure that we find ways to keep folks pumped and excited, in addition to being able to do, to have the resource and the access and the folks that graduate and take on these positions. But you got to have somebody out there really pushing that narrative forward. Like, one of my dreams and goals is I love to be an ambassador for mental health with the United States. I don't even know how that works. I don't even know if that's possible. I don't know if that's a thing. But I want to wave that mental health flag for the U.S. and for underserved communities until God says, job well done, good and faithful servant.
Good and faithful servant. We need to look at how we create that ambassadorship, because it's needed, and we need to acknowledge and appreciate our behavioral health therapists while they're doing the work, and find a way to thank them and to make sure that we let them know we see you, we value you, and we appreciate what you're doing, so that we can keep them engaged in doing the hard work that they're doing for so many others. Let's go over here to the chat and see if there's some questions. What's really in here, Shanti, is more, and you've been looking at it, more appreciation and acknowledgement of you and your work. So there may be there's one question here, but really there's an acknowledgement of you and what you're doing. So there's a question here. I love the excuse me. Let me see if I can get to it, because the it's moving. Were you surprised, Shanti? Were you surprised at the support you received from the music industry regarding mental health awareness?
Great question. I just want to shout out Jeffrey and Jamie. Thank you for the kind words. Yes, Dan, I was super surprised, and I was going back to that, I was fearful and I was afraid to tell my colleagues, right? Because I had this storied career in music. You know how it is, out of sight, out of mind. I hadn't been at the labels for a while. And I have a good story to tell that will answer this question. So a couple of years ago, I got invited. I usually go out to LA during the Grammy Awards. If anyone knows in the music business, the Grammy week is the week in entertainment, to be in the who's who of the industries, and the musicians are always there. And Jay-Z and Beyonce, Jay-Z has a company called Rock Nation. They do a Rock Nation brunch every year at the Grammys, and it's always A-list from sports, fashion, film, TV. I ended up getting invited unexpectedly, and I almost didn't go because, one, I don't make the same money I used to. I don't have all those expensive clothes like I used to, and it would be nothing for me to go drop $800 on the dress. Can't do that anymore. So anyway, I was ashamed. And, when people see you, they go, "Oh, how you doing? What you been doing?" "Oh, I'm good. I thought about killing myself, but I'm doing this humble mental health work." And I wasn't sure how I was going to let those conversations roll off of my tongue. So I didn't have, and the theme of the brunch was like florals and flowery stuff. So I knew everybody's going to be decked out. So anyway, long story short, I prayed about it, and God was like, "Just go, just be you. You're still Shanti Das." I went, I had on a black sweatshirt and black pants, and everybody else was decked out. But everybody was so gracious, Dan. I saw Jay-Z, I saw Beyonce. I hadn't seen them in years. I told them about my challenges. I told them about starting, Silence Your Shame, and ended up being a wonderful experience. And so I say all that to say, even when I got on social media and started bearing my soul, I had more colleagues to either text me or send me a DM. "I've had a similar experience," or "I've had those thoughts," or "Can you help me find a therapist?" If I help one person, I help 50 of my colleagues and friends find therapy. So I know it's helping. I know that my work is not in vain. And so, yes, I was embarrassed, but it ended up being okay. And I'm grateful for that.
Fantastic. And thank you for sharing that story. Two questions here. One from Beth. "I couldn't agree more about having a safe space. I work in a youth treatment facility that works with youth with trauma, behavioral, and mental health issues. Do you have program suggestions or activities that would benefit the adolescent population?"
That is a great question. So we don't have programs yet for the younger demographic. We're working on building out some stuff for middle schoolers now. But what I would say for adolescents, just a few things. I think like these affirmation walls are really great, right? Because the one thing about kids when they're so young is, rather than use the term mental health, we should, utilize thoughts and feelings, right? And I'm not a therapist. This is just my, just some advice. But create these affirmation walls when you're dealing with the youth, and allow them to talk about how they're feeling today, or write down, their aspirations and things that they want to do. So being able to get them to just open up about feelings in general, whether it's thoughts about their future or about how they're feeling right now. I tend to find that works really well when you're talking about the adolescent community and population, because they're still learning, and this terminology, if you will, can be a little bit more for them to consume. And so you got to really start them around thoughts and feelings and how to process through that. And wellness activities really play well into that. So being able to utilize, art as therapy or helping their mood and how they feel. So being able to integrate the arts into those conversations, I think, can be helpful.
Yeah, thank you very much. Shanti, how do you respond to people who question, how can you have these sad feelings when you are assumed to have everything? Again, judging the book by its cover.
Ooh, child, Alita, girl, that is the question of the day. And I just got to a point now where I don't care anymore. Like, I'm on social media and I've had people make those comments like, you are you sad, or you always this, or that person, or you get to do that. None of that matters at the end of the day. And a lot of it's a front. We put on our best face to feel good and to go to work every day and or to raise our families or to do our jobs and be the best that we can be. But life is tough. And so I just can't worry about what everybody else is saying. And if they don't understand why I'm sad or why I'm dealing with what I'm dealing with, then, I don't feel like I have to explain myself to those folks anymore. It's my life. It is what it is. And that's why I am kind of such an open book, because I want people to know that, yeah, you can have experienced all these great things or gone to these events, but like, just because I've attended a Rock Nation brunch with Jay-Z don't mean I can pick up the phone and call him. Like, people, they see what they want to see, right? And it's so much that's misunderstood around celebrity and the entertainment industry and all that. And some of it's smoke and mirrors. And so the folks who just are there for the hype, I don't let those people into my space and my world. And if they have an issue with what's going on, then that's their problem. I try to treat people with kindness and be the same to everybody. And no matter if you're someone that suffers from a mental illness or if you're a big superstar, I'm going to treat you the exact same way, with kindness and humility, as best as I can. We all make mistakes. We're all human, but I just try not to get caught up in the mess.
Yeah. Understood. There is, Nicholas says, you already are an ambassador, Shanti. Thank you for all you do.
Thank you.
Beth says thank you, and there's some other incredible comments here. Joel says something, and then I want to ask another question. My therapist once shared a great wisdom with me, saying you can't be down because other people have it worse. It makes as little sense as saying you can't be happy because other people have it better. I think that's a nice one.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Shanti, we have this new number that's coming. You referenced the National Suicide Prevention number earlier, and that number is going to move from being the 10-digit number to a 988.
Right.
And that 988 number in and of itself is not going to be the panacea. There's a lot of excitement and interest around 988. We just did a poll. NAMI just did a poll, and this poll found that only 4% of citizens in the U.S. know what 988 is. They know anything about it. So that's 96% that don't. The bigger part of that is coming to what you mentioned about infrastructure and having some type of a wellness center or something like that. We see the number and that there has to be infrastructure around it. What are you hearing about 988? What do you think 988 will provide in communities that we don't have right now?
So I heard a lot about it at one time, but I will be honest, I don't have a lot of updated information in terms of the launch and so forth right now. I am happy that is going to exist. I think it's super important. I think it's easier than having to remember 1-800-273-TALK. I think we can see, like, for situations where sometimes family members and loved ones have to call 911, right, for their loved ones. And we've seen, really tough situations turn into terrible situations when the police come out and they are not trained. We know about CIT trained officers, crisis in training officers, but not every city and state, does a good job with that. So I think 988 is going to hopefully alleviate some of those tragedies that we see, and help folks, to access, help and service, especially when you're talking about crisis situations.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that is what's so important, is being able to de-escalate those situations when you have someone that is in crisis. So I am excited about that. I think it really needs to be a collaborative effort amongst, all of us to really put 988 out there and bring it to the forefront so that it is as easy to remember as 911. And I just hope that each state, really trains the folks who are going to be on the other side of those calls, to do it in a way that is helpful and thoughtful, and being able to provide the services needed.
Thank you very much, Shanti. There's a comment, but there's a question here. We'll wrap up, and then I'll wrap with the comment. But Beth says, when you find yourself, Shanti, in a negative headspace, how do you cope? DBT skills, what works best for Shanti?
Great question, and that's a ever-changing answer. But sometimes I pray about it. A lot of times I just have to get out of the house, because when I'm just sitting and by myself, my mind and my thoughts, just start racing too much. So I might call a trusted friend or loved one. I do bring it up, in therapy, to try to find better ways to deal with it. But I just either I pray about it, or I get up and I take a walk and I try to get out of those thoughts and in my head. Because I'm a worrier. I'm a Pisces. I'm emotional. I'm very anal about my health. So if there's one physical health issue, sometimes my mind might race to, oh my God, well, could it be this or could it be that? And again, like I told you, I just dealt with something yesterday and I talked myself down a rabbit hole. And by the end of the conversation, I was diagnosing myself with something that hadn't even been diagnosed yet, right? So I am a worrier, right? And my anxiety kicks in a lot. But I got out of the house. I went to dinner with friends. I try to just control those narratives and situations as best as I can now. I'm not at the point where I feel like I need medication for my anxiety, but I do have to be very cognizant of my choices and very intentional about my choices when I feel like I'm going down that rabbit hole.
So Shanti, you have such an incredible group of friends. We're in your outer circle here, this group right here today. Your authenticity and your realness and Auntie Shanti has just been such a blessing to everyone that's participated on today. And you've normalized the conversation here for us. And in closing, just want to thank the CEO of NAMI Keystone, Pennsylvania, Christine Michaels, and her team for bringing us together and for allowing us to have this conversation on this morning. And we just appreciate NAMI Keystone, Pennsylvania, and Silence the Shame, and Shanti Das for all of the work that they're doing. And Shanti, thank you. We know we took up a good amount of your time, but we appreciate the investment you made in us on today, and just love you to close it out for us.
So again, thank you, NAMI Keystone, Pennsylvania. Thank you, Dan, the NAMI National Chapter. It truly has been an honor to share this Thursday morning, November 18th, with all of you all. If you want to follow me on Instagram, you can follow me at Shanti Das 404. You can follow Silence the Shame at Silence the Shame on Instagram. On Facebook, it's at Silence TH Shame. I'm also going to be starting my own podcast coming up in the new year that I'll be doing separate from Silence the Shame. It'll be under my Wellness brand. And, thank you. I just wish that you all take the time to pour back into yourselves. Doing this work is really tough, as we mentioned. And just understand that you got to take each day one day at a time. We're all dealing with a lot of grief, unexpected loss, but just know that never lose hope. I just want to leave y'all with the word hope, because at the end of the day, that's what it's about. It's about getting the help that we need and knowing that tomorrow brings a new opportunity, of joy, hope, love, and peace. And I just wish peace to you all and happy holidays to each and every one of you. And remember to take time, save a life, and silence the shame. Thank you.
Thank you, Shanti. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Great job.
Have a great rest of your conference.
All right. All the best, everyone.